Good morning, everyone. This is Richard Schwartz from Global Custodian, and welcome to our webcast, slightly delayed by technical issues, apologies for that, on how to maximize your clients' after-tax performance. This is not necessarily an easy topic to get your head around, but over the course of the next hour, we're going to unpick and unpack it with a distinguished panel who I'll show you shortly, but I'll then ask them each to introduce themselves briefly and explain their connection to the topic, and then we'll get right into the discussion. If you have any questions during the panel, you'll see a Q&A menu at the top. If you type your questions in there, we'll come to them as we go along. So these are the areas we plan to cover. These are the people who are going to cover them with you. We have Christophe Lapere and Jörg Stalder from SIX, Roman van der Hoe from Avalog, Philippe Mitterbaar, and me. And each of them will have an opportunity to explain why they're on this panel. The areas we're going to cover include the main challenges in offering tax claim services, whether reclaim or relief at source or whatever happens to be the standard and the market concerned. The extent to which tax services can be or should be outsourced to external providers, and a range of issues around that, which I will come to. Now, I'd like to ask the panelists in this order, Christophe, Jörg, Roman, and Philippe, to just briefly introduce themselves and say what their connection is to this topic. And let's start with Christophe, if he can hear me. Christophe? Okay, I've suddenly changed my mind, and let's start with Philippe. Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Can you just briefly explain why you're on the panel? So what is your connection to this topic?
So I'm from Braffa LLP. We are a UK-based wealth manager, and we ensure that our clients benefit from foreign withholding tax relief at source where available, but where such relief is not available, we help clients with the reclaim of foreign withholding taxes as much as possible. So this is the connection to the topic.
Great. Christophe, are you with us yet? Seems to have lost the connection. So we'll come back to Jörg. Can you tell us why you're here? What is your connection to the after-tax services?
Yes, hi, Richard, and hello to the audience. My name is Jörg Stalder. I'm Senior Product Manager for SIX Financial Information. I'm mainly responsible for offerings in the tax data space. So this is where we provide classifications on how certain securities are treated under different tax juris laws. Okay. We're also working on an offering where we are calculating the actual tax cost, again, on the basis of a end investor jurisdiction. And so this data, we hope, will be used to, first of all, help with the tax optimization, whether that is in the actual advisory business or in the post-trade processing service.
Thanks. And not on screen, but online is Roman van der Hoe from Avalok. Roman, can you explain your background in this topic?
Yes. Very good morning to everyone on the call. Roman van der Hoe speaking here from Avalok. I have a long history in the tax field, doing this specific business for more than a decade. I'm globally leading the banking process outsourcing tax team of Avalok right now with various locations around the globe.
Thanks. And finally, Christophe, let's try again. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, I just had a connection issue just before we started. My name is Christophe Lapère. I have been with the SIX Exchange and the SIX Group, if you want, for almost 10 years, involved in interesting large projects. One of the last one was the implementation of Target 2 securities. I have a good knowledge of the industry, having been head of operations and CEO of several private banks, where we implemented also tax services. Since the beginning of this year, actually, or the end of last year, we have set up a new department called Advanced Tax Services. And we are actually in this department taking care of the solutions that SIX and the SIX Exchange is offering to address tax issues, which include relief at source, quick refund, tax reclaim services, and this new service which we want also to bring a bit nearer to you today, which is really helping improving after-tax performance to clients, which we call advanced tax reclaim service.
Okay, thanks. So now actually it seems like we've got everyone on screen, which is very good. Before we drill down into the specifics of after-tax performance, I'd like to take a step back and look at tax services in general in the context of securities processing. Now, if you take the securities transaction chain broadly, there are some areas that are very well automated. Settlement comes to mind, for example. And there are others like corporate actions, which seem a bit of a struggle to automate. Where in that continuum would you put tax services? Perhaps I can ask Roman to kick that off.
Yes, thank you for that question. That's a very good one, actually. So having seen all of these back office activities so far in my professional career, I would put tax service somewhere in the middle. Of course, we don't see like real STP and STP KPIs in tax services usually. That is really true. But for certain tax services, you would find relatively high automation rates. For example, tax reporting or tax statements production, that is highly automated usually. Of course, we always have to keep in mind that there's a high complexity, a lack of harmonization in that field, and therefore you need a significant investment for automation. So we'll never go to, I think, to the level where settlement is or payments, for example. And we always have the issue that once in a while, like every year, the regulation, the framework, or the laws itself change, and then you need to adapt your technical setup, your processes, procedures, which is not really nice, but you actually have to do that. And finally, you will always stick with some controls and checks and testing activities. For that, you of course need highly skilled experts. So you will always find some manual work in the tax field. I don't believe that will be gone in a couple of years.
So is there...
If that answers your question.
It does partially. Is there a level of service that the average client would expect when they hear tax services? Is there a template for intermediaries in terms of what they offer and how they offer it? Or is there significant differentiation amongst different intermediaries? Perhaps Philip, you could, as a wealth manager or from a wealth management firm, you could address that.
So if you see tax services as providing withholding tax relief at source, then and via reclaims, then I would say that it's partly automated. The relief at source, once set up correctly, happens automatically because it's provided by the custodian, which is the primary withholding agent. But when it comes to reclaims, it can be a very manual process.
Okay. Now, what I'd like to do to unpack this a little bit is go to a first poll, and hopefully this is going to work well. You can select as many of these options as you like. What are the main challenges in offering tax claim services? Now, you may be offering them, you may be outsourcing them, you may be a client of them, but in your own daily experience, which of these issues are significant to you? And I'm going to click start now. And you should be able to can everyone see the poll? Okay, numbers are starting to come in. So while the numbers are adjusting, just looking at what we have, it seems like the complex process that we spoke about at the beginning is seen as one of the major issues. And dealing with tax authorities, which I think Roman alluded to, is also seen as a major issue. Any comment from Christoph or Jörg on what you see there as the result? So Christoph, yeah.
Yes, I think I'm not surprised at all. As this was correctly stated, there are some processes which can be automated, like the relief at source process. Even there is some client intervention which is required. But for the reclaim process, the lack of harmonization and the process complexity, because every market or every country, if I may say so, is using individual forms, individual ways of reporting, is requesting different questions, requesting different data from the same beneficial owner. Actually putting all that together is a major challenge for a lot of banks. And this is where a professional service provider who does not only provide a software solution, but a real service, end-to-end, like the one we are producing at SIX since a couple of years, is extremely beneficial for clients.
So are these issues things that service providers can tackle on their own, or are they issues that need to be addressed at an industry level? For example, dealing with tax authorities is something that everybody has to do. The complexity of the process is something that everyone experiences. Has the industry made any progress collectively in addressing these issues? Perhaps Jörg, you might want to comment on that. I think your voice, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, I definitely think there has been an industry effort, in the whole space of tax data processing to basically get to a more streamlined view. I would slightly extend it from my optic to take it out of the post-trading space, where there's a lot of data interaction and therefore a need for harmonization, is also if it's extended out to the buy side. So we see as well that there's demand to actually make tax data, we can also refer to it as tax suitability data, even available in the kind of advisory process. So in the sense that, like, if there's a advisory business about the future tax product, you need to already take into account the cost, holding cost, tax cost, for example. And then that data basically has to travel through with your security through the processing chain. So it's very much, I think, an industry problem when you just stick within the actual post-trade services, but it reaches out even further into the value chain, including the buy side as well.
So where, in your view, has the industry made the most progress, and what is still crying out for resolution, whether you put it situated in post-trade or more broadly? Roman, would you like to take that?
Well, yes, what I've seen over the years, at least a bit of harmonization of the procedures, and the forms look now a bit more similar than many years before, and that is what I've seen. But many people tried, or you just haven't. I've seen an example in Germany where the authorities, via a circular, forbid to get the signatures from the local tax authorities by the banks, and still the industry there in Germany were not able to convince the authorities. So there's something lacking still. Huh? There are some progresses, but not really a lot.
Philippe, did you want to come in there?
No, I was just adjusting my microphone.
Okay. Well, while we have you, the question of harmonization has come up a couple of times. Now, I'm assuming that the obvious arena to discuss harmonization or the success of harmonization would be the EU. What would you give the EU for efforts at tax harmonization to date out of 10?
Right. So I would say that VAT has been harmonized. That seems to work well for the supply of goods and services within the EU. But on the withholding tax front, I think it was mainly the European Court of Justice that tried to level the playing field here with its Aberdeen decision in 2009, according to which investment funds are entitled to claim back discriminatory withholding tax levied on EU source dividends. But one has to realize that fiscal policy is still, unfortunately, a very national matter. Despite the fact that there is now more automatic exchange of information between jurisdictions than ever. We had started with the EU Savings Directive, then CRS, now we have MDR, or DEC 6, as it's also called. But even there we have outliers, such as Sweden, for instance, where funds and investment firms conducting business in Sweden are obliged to file information on income earned by Swedish investors on an annual basis to the Swedish tax agency, parallel to their CRS obligations. And then France, that has imposed reporting obligations on trusts that have no French connection other than holding shares in a French company. So this is a regime that causes quite a bit of stir in the wealth management industry. I can tell you that. So there is still a long way ahead for tax harmonization in the EU and globally, but the efforts are there. So for the EU, to answer your question, I would give a solid 5 out of 10.
Okay. Christophe, as a service provider, do you think that's harsh? Do you think that's over generous?
Yes, definitely. Actually, Philippe's 5 out of 10, I could sign it off. I'm a bit smiling because I would have said almost the same thing. Tax authorities are different than market authorities. They don't really like to be organized with their markets and with investors. They want to do their thing by their own. And there are very few real panels and places where you can actually discuss with tax authorities. So the contact in the context essentially of the reclaim or the claims business, the individual contact you have with those different tax authorities is very important. And the trust the tax authorities have with those different banks and service providers in that context is very important. We have tried to challenge a number of processes, with the Swiss authorities, with the German authorities, with some other European authorities, who in the best case give you a nice answer and in some cases don't give you an answer at all. So harmonization is a fairy tale in that area of the claims. And one has the impression that everything is made to make it as complicated as possible, because after all, paying taxes back is probably not the first priority of all the European countries.
Now, that said, we've spoken about the lack of the natural cooperation among tax authorities and that they guard their independence to some degree. But is there actually a positive benefit from having different withholding tax rates? I mean, is it something that in itself authorities want to maintain? Philippe, would you like to?
Yeah, so from an investment perspective, I think that the fact that the UK does not levy withholding tax on UK dividends is an advantage. But one must also not forget that the tax tail rarely wags the investment dog. But I think that an important advantage a market jurisdiction can have is a clear and robust withholding tax relief mechanism, whether it's via source relief or via reclaim. Good examples for source relief are the US, Australia, and Canada, from my experience. And then for an efficient reclaim process are Switzerland, Finland, Sweden, and Netherlands.
Anyone else want to comment on that? As Philippe said, the tax tail rarely wags the investment dog. In your experience, do investment managers actually put the consequences of different tax regimes sufficiently high on their agenda or on their priorities in terms of the impact on the investments themselves? Roman, you're smiling there, so I'll come to you.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, of course. I'm smiling a bit about this question. Thank you. Because having a lot of interactions with our clients at Avaloq, I would tell a story. No, they usually, well, if you are forbidden to buy an asset, then okay. But looking at the tax overall picture, I think most of the clients don't have the capabilities simply. So for that, you need a lot of data. You need to have the data on the end client, on the asset itself, on the market, on the investment market, and the framework around it. And is there a perfect solution already out there in order to determine if what the outcome would look like if I invest in an asset? Well, I would doubt that at the moment. There are certain players out there with software, with services, of course, but I think there's not a perfect solution. It's highly complex, and that's why I believe currently most of the investors don't look at the tax consequences right from the start. And then they are surprised what is going to happen if they receive a dividend payment with a high withholding tax rate and are not able to reclaim it, like in Italy after 10 years. Maybe you get a refund, and then you're surprised.
Philippe, are you still there, or have you just dropped off?
I'm still. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Do you recognize that as a common attitude amongst your peers?
So I can say that tax efficiency on investments is very important indeed, as it benefits both the investor and the investment manager, as we are going to see. Now, I think to fully understand this, we first have to be clear about where taxation can occur in relation to investing. In the most common scenario, taxation happens at two levels. At investment level through withholding tax in the country of source, and then again at investor level through tax returns in the country of the investor's residence. And whenever you have more than one level of taxation, there is the risk of double taxation that needs to be mitigated. On the other hand, some investors may not be subject to taxation in their country of tax residence, for instance, pension funds or charities. Similarly, some investors may be entitled to a lower or even zero withholding tax at source through a double taxation agreement. So there are a number of variables that determine where and how much tax is due on an investment. And this is where an effective operational tax function can make a real difference, as it benefits both the investor and the investment manager for the following reasons. First, it reduces withholding tax leakage at source, at the investment level for the client, and then it reduces double taxation. So taxation of the same income at both investment and investor level. Now take the following situation where investors are liable to tax on investment income in their country of residence. They have to declare the gross amount of foreign dividends and interest in their tax return. But the foreign tax credits they get in their country of residence is often limited to the tax treaty rate, so limited to what the investor is not entitled to reclaim. For example, withholding tax is 30%, treaty rate is 15%. That means that the foreign tax credit is 15%. And if the investor doesn't get source relief or doesn't reclaim the 15%, then over withheld tax, and there is double taxation. And the investment manager's operational tax function can help mitigate that. Now, all of this benefits the investor, but it also benefits the investment manager, as it leaves the investment manager with more funds to be managed and reinvested. So tax efficiency is important, and it's worth to be taken seriously into consideration by wealth managers.
Is it easy to arrive at a reasonably accurate calculation of the impact of different approaches to tax? I mean, here we're getting on to the issue of after-tax performance. Now, just before this webinar, I Googled after-tax performance, and I got a long list of articles about computational methodologies of various different kinds that I found overwhelming. How easy is it, Christoph, to cut your way through this morass of possible methodologies?
It's actually a challenging topic anyway. I was in my younger years portfolio manager for a very large institution, a national institution in Switzerland, and we were, of course, exonerated from tax in the management because of the nature of that organization. The amounts involved, once you are seeing what you get credited de facto after withholding tax of your dividend and income on your bonds, in some countries, the amounts involved are substantial. But the complexity of managing that after-tax performance topic is such that many people essentially in the past did just ignore it. This topic is coming more and more as an interesting topic. We have recently been contacted by a wealth manager who is effectively has decided to institutionalize this service for their larger bank, and they are looking for a service provider in this context, which means that important wealth manager had not thought at it or at a potential solution for the last 10, 20 years. And it has been in the business of wealth management for many more years than that. Every year you are just letting those withholding tax unclaimed, and we are talking about huge amounts. In the sum of it, you are simply losing a potential additional return for the client, or potential assets under custody or under management for yourself as a bank.
And why do you think it is that they've taken this position over the years? Is it just that it's very complex to calculate, or they haven't really seen the relevance because they're looking more at the portfolio's top line?
If I may just precise, I think it's not a question of complexity of calculation. It's a question, and Roman said it. It's either Roman and Jörg said it. It's either the complexity of flagging which investments in the special context of your client are tax efficient, and for which investments the reclaiming of a withholding tax can be efficient afterwards. So that's one part of the complexity. And the other one, which is definitely the much more complex part, is to do it, to reclaim it with all those 100 different countries for which double tax treaties for that local tax domicile of that client exists. So the combination possibilities are thousands of possibilities of reclaiming. So and covering that complexity, offering such a service is actually something banks have been, most of the banks have been extremely careful in offering that service as a standard to their clients.
And is that something that you
If
think?
I may add on,
Yeah,
on this,
sure.
Christoph, your last point is really, we have, Six Financial Information, developed kind of a scoring system, so another calculation method for tax efficiency. You won't find it on the web yet because the product is not yet launched. But it really came out of the angle that tax was becoming a topic for investment managers because of outside the compliance aspect. So whereas previously, they would be worried about producing potentially tax harmful products, with the financial market regulation over the last years, there has really become the issue of the cost-conscious investor. And cost involves all sorts of costs, amongst them also in terms of tax treatment of income related to your financial instrument. So the kind of algorithm that we have developed is to calculate the tax cost on a financial instrument level, depending on where the actually end investor sits. And so that's considering various criteria, but in no ways can that cover the whole complexity of things like double tax withholding rates, the reclaim process. So all factors that are very, very specific then to an investor. So with abstractions, we can get to basically come up with a score for tax efficiency, but that in itself can only help to then customize the advice you can give or the service you can give with the tax services to individual investors and their particular situation.
How easy is it to get the data you need to calculate that tax efficiently or to populate your algorithm? Where does it sit?
So we are getting the data, if you want, from our own data. That can be so-called instrument reference data containing certain tax attributes. Is it exempt from withholding tax? Does it fall under an international regulation such as 871M? We also use historical price data to assess the capital gain element. And we look at all the corporate actions, so all the income events you can have it. And being a data provider, we obviously do that on historical data. So the score we're calculating is always a backwards score. So it's an indicator of potential tax costs based on past history, which in a similar way to like performance indicators is no guarantee for future treatment. But we can get to a lot of data just through the actual instrument reference data.
Roman, when I mentioned
Richard,
data, yeah, is that Philippe? Yeah.
Yeah, if I may second to Jörg, and especially to what Philip just said a couple of minutes ago, I think the complexity lies in these different levels of taxation. You have the asset, you have the investor, and the combination of all of that is really highly complex. And for that, you need to have technology and a really, really good understanding of the individual tax laws. Because if you want to look at an individual investor, you also need to consider the status of the investor, not only of the assets. So what Jörg just said is just a part of the whole overall picture. And if you want to cover the whole picture of the after-tax performance and the analysis of that, or the assessment of that, that becomes really highly complex.
While we were talking, Ross Henderson posted a question, which I think I'll mention now because it's relevant. Is the issue that wealth managers are not invested in tax leakage either pre or post trade, and therefore the poor tax service and leakage reflects this reality? So it's a question of investment by wealth managers that's lacking. Philippe, would you say that's accurate?
So, well, I think coming back to the question whether how to quantify the impact of after-tax performance. That is only possible on a case-by-case basis, as it really depends on where and what you invest in. So the type of clients you have as well. Give me, I'm facing technical issues here. Sorry.
Do you want me to come back to you?
Yeah, sorry. Hold on a second. Yeah, it's much better now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, fantastic.
Yes,
so let me give you the example of a very common market, the US, for instance. So without any tax service or tax efficiency, US withholding tax on income is 30%. But if the investment manager has a qualified intermediary agreement in place and documented all his clients, then the withholding tax gets reduced to 0% on US interest and 15% on US dividends, for instance, for UK individual investors. But for UK pension funds, it's even more dramatic. So they are entitled to receive US income gross without any tax deducted. So it can make a real difference indeed. But withholding tax relief at source is only available for eligible investors. So investors that are resident in a jurisdiction with a relevant double taxation agreement in place. So client data is also very important. And often this data is in the hands of the investment manager, not the custodian, who is the primary withholding agent. So where you have a pooled custody account that shall benefit from source relief, it is the investment manager that has to ensure that only eligible clients are in the relevant pooled account.
So who then should be doing these calculations, or do they need to be replicated along the chain? I mean, is there how much of this can actually be outsourced by any of the people along the chain, and how much, because of the nature of what they do and their clients and client confidentiality, do they actually have to do themselves, whether they want to or not? Christoph, perhaps you could have a go at that.
Who should do it? Clearly, if the bank has the necessary means of investing in technology, wants to do those investments, developing all the expertise in-house, maintaining the systems, constantly monitor what is happening in the changes of the different markets, in order to ensure that the process can be offered in a professional and streamlined manner to their clients. This is absolutely not an issue. Everybody can do it. But it's a lot of money, it's a lot of expertise, it's a lot of efforts to be maintained. And this is the reason why banks don't do it. We at the Swiss Stock Exchange, we have in discussions with Swiss and Liechtenstein wealth managers and also international wealth managers, we have actually developed this service, advanced tax services, exactly to take over that process end to end from the banks and have them the possibility to offer the service as a standard to their clients. And it's a lot of effort on our side. Not everything is automated. So there are still a lot of manual processes involved. It's a lot of paper-based at the end things to do. But we have actually developed that service in order to allow the banks to outsource this service to the Swiss to the Swiss financial industry provider and not to a competitor.
Roman, as a provider of technology to help support this, what kind of queries are you getting from potential clients? So the banks in the first instance, or other potential providers of an efficient tax service?
Well, yeah, we already are part of the outsourcing chain, which means we provide exactly this full outsourcing of the whole tax services to our clients. So the queries, yes, they are there. We receive them constantly. So a lot of banks, when they decide to go on our technology platform, afterwards they realize, okay, it's not only about technology. So you have to have the technology, which is fine, and with the tax engines in it, and then you can calculate a lot, and you can support your procedures and processes. But on the other hand, then you need still to have a lot of capable staff members who do the job, right? And that's why a lot of banks then decide afterwards to go with our outsourcing services as well.
And are banks generally comfortable with outsourcing in this area?
Well, what we see, especially in this COVID-19 situation, the demand is even increasing because banks are realizing that digitalization is really an asset, especially in situations like today. Avaloq was able in 1-2 weeks to have everybody, 2,500 people at home working in the technology part as well in the banking outsourcing part. And I think that's a real asset, and that's what banks now realize, that they have to become more digitalized. There is cost pressure around, and then on the other hand, you have the demands from the investor side to have a better after-tax performance. So who is going then to deliver it? Is it the bank themselves? Most banks decide that they don't want to ramp up such a service, such expertise, and invest in technology, and that's why they more and more outsource those services. And coming back to what Jörg told about the common reporting standard and let's say, more open industry in regards to disclosing end client data, the outsourcing becomes even more easier than before, like 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Jörg, that raises an interesting point. Have you noticed any change in attitude since the start of the COVID crisis from clients? You're on mute, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's been concerns, obviously, about like sharing client-specific data with whether it's with data provider or service providers. But I think absolutely the experience of working from home for many market participants has actually encouraged the view that some of the security concerns dealing with such questions can be solved. So in a sense, like my expectation would also be that in the post-COVID phase, there would be an increased tendency to consider actually outsourcing of service.
Right. I'd now like to move to the second poll on outsourcing. And you see the questions there. Here it's a one answer only. To what extent are the tax services you offer outsourced to external providers? So let's take stock of the current state of play, and then we'll look at where things are going. I'm going to start the polling now. So roughly at the moment, it looks like still half of the participants are not outsourcing. Christoph, looking at those numbers, is there anything that strikes you?
You know, I was expecting it. There is a huge potential for the industry to make their clients profit from withholding tax reclaims. There is a huge potential. I'm not surprised at all. It's the picture, if you were looking at amongst maybe only the industry of Swiss private banks or Liechtenstein private banks, the picture would be a bit different. But internationally and actually globally, this is exactly what I'm expecting. And we are talking again about substantial amounts. When we see the tickets which we are capable of claiming back for the beneficiaries of our clients, I mean, going in the hundreds of thousands of euro for a claiming back. You get the tax back of that. I don't understand that people don't, do it systematically, offer it systematically to their clients. That nobody wants to, or very few people want to develop that service by themselves, fair enough, because it's really complicated and it requires a lot of expertise. But, the SIX exchange the Swiss exchange is at disposition to talk about any service proposition for that advanced tax service solution we have. It's absolutely smart.
Philippe, I can't see you, so I can't see your expression. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, but I can hear you clearly.
Okay.
Yeah. Not surprised at all. And we have to distinguish between the different tax services that are required. So we have withholding tax relief at source, and then we have relief via reclaims. Now, relief at source is, of course, the by far more attractive way of foreign tax relief. That what hasn't been withheld doesn't need to be reclaimed. But in both cases, the investor often relies on the investment manager. So the investment manager has to obtain relief at source where possible. And this may require an agreement, as I mentioned earlier, with foreign countries, for instance, the QI agreement with the US IRS. And an investment manager that has entered into a QI agreement is then entitled to receive US income as much lower withholding tax rates for eligible clients. But on the other hand, the investment manager is obliged to document and report account holders. And the so-called W8 forms are the documentation instrument for this. And anyone who's ever seen a W8 form will agree that's one of the most dreadful forms you can give a client to complete. So clients are extremely grateful for any guidance to help them complete such forms correctly. And again, this is an area where a good operational tax function can add real value to both the client and the business. Now, I keep mentioning the investment manager's operational tax function, but having a good custodian on board is equally important because, as I said earlier, the custodian is the primary withholding agent in most cases. So the custodian normally offers a tax service that provides withholding tax relief at source where possible. But where such relief is not possible, then the only other option is relief via reclaim. And this comes with its own challenges. So, as we said earlier, a lack of reclaim procedures and efficiency in jurisdictions. Then foreign withholding tax reclaims have to be made by the investor, so the shareholder, which is the client. And this is a lot to ask from a client. Clients are often not in a position to initiate a reclaim procedure for a number of reasons. First, it's complicated. You have to know exactly what and how much you can reclaim. It involves completion of a foreign tax form. Clients need a foreign withholding tax certificate or voucher from the intermediary and often also from the custodian. And then last but not least, it requires interaction with foreign tax authorities. One has to send the forms to the right address and then may face queries from the foreign tax authorities. So for all these reasons, clients normally rely on their investment manager to assist with that. And this is a service that is highly appreciated and that can be outsourced. Yes.
So
if I may add something here,
sure.
Richard, So I'm also not surprised at all. What you usually always find in the tax operations of a bank is that they do the common reporting standard, that they do FATCA and QI reporting, and potentially they even produce tax statements. But what is always the last item on the list, funnily, is where you can get really money back. So all the others, you just have to fulfill all the reporting stuff. But when it comes to, hey, I can reclaim, I can have a relief at source, as Philip just mentioned, then a lot of banks tend to not opt for that service. They even outsource tax statements production because that's highly complex if you look at the multi-jurisdiction, so individual specific country statements. That is rather complex, but where the money lies, less people opt for that. That is interesting to see.
Absolutely. So in the few minutes we've got remaining, I'd like to ask you to just open your imaginations a little bit and say, if you were designing, let's say miraculously you were appointed to run a global committee on tax services and making them efficient, who would be in your intermediary chain and what would they be doing? Ideally, obviously, we're just dreaming here. But let's start with Christoph.
Look, if that question is a question which I asked myself, and we asked it with a number of colleagues in the past, having been in the industry for at least 35 years. If I was, I would like to open up the question. If I was a bank, if I was a wealth manager, today, honestly, I would focus on my clients and on the portfolio management of my clients' assets. And I would outsource absolutely everything which has to do with operations, tax, and so on and so forth. You need to choose good partners in your outsourcing exercise. And there are excellent people offering super service on the industry. This is no question. The only thing is people always are reluctant about, it's a question of trust. Nowadays, honestly, where the automatic exchange of information is in place. Clients, in terms of processing their tax reclaims or asking for relief at source, don't care about the fact that the tax processing could be outsourced. They want actually to be sure that it is outsourced to a very serious partner, taking data security, information security very safe, very serious, and actually is efficient in processing whatever processes are outsourced. The industry will have to come to it. The banking industry will have to come to it, and it is taking place. What is taking place today, but what is taking place today is more mergers and mergers of smaller and medium-sized institutions or even larger institutions who then try to leverage on the larger size of their business. But the outsourcing of non-core processes to professional outsourcing partners is actually the next step, and it will take place.
Philippe, do you recognize that as something your peers would be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes. As I said earlier, a relief at source, that is relatively easy obtained when it's set up as the custodian is the primary withholding agent. But when it comes to relief via reclaims, that is, when we started it more than 10 years ago, it was a very manual process. And we now managed to semi-automate it, and we're in the process of fully automating it. But it is a service that is highly appreciated by clients, and it's very worth covering this topic. Yeah.
And Roman?
Yes. So your question was regarding the whole tax service, like a chain. Who would be in there, right? In my ideal world, yeah.
Exactly.
First of all, I like the point from Philip, the custodian. So choose your custodian wisely, because I've seen in my past custodians that don't offer any tax service, and then you are stuck. Right, so choose your custodian wisely. If you are able to do so, it's important. Then, of course, I would choose a technology company to build a core of the software. Like Avaloq, we are a software house per se. But in addition, I would always do that, because you cannot do everything on your own. Choose particular, specific little companies who can add value for certain parts of the tax field. And then, of course, you need tax expertise, maybe with tax expertise company like one of the big four, and you need a good back office, because there will always be some things to be done manually in the tax world. And I think with that bundle of expertise and companies, then you would have an ideal picture for me.
And Jörg, I'll let you have the final word on this.
Oh, really? Thank you. No, I would take up the point that Roman made, and really it's not about having new players involved, but maybe looking around the change, like how far can you go with standardization? How far can your tax department actually concentrate on automate further one of these standard cases, and then concentrate on adding value to the business? So in your attempt to basically further standardize and automate, get lower with the total cost of ownership, which is, let's face it, a big topic. You want the actual resources that you have currently in your post-trading tax operations to be more at the service of the business, and for example provide intelligence, call it tax intelligence, to all the way to the front, to the investment officer, and basically transmit information about the costs associated with tax treating financial products. And I think as such it becomes for the future a big task that ultimately standardization and outsourcing can ultimately help to really improve the actual core business of some banks, which is still looking after actual investors.
So on that note, I'd like to thank you all for participating, and I'm sure we'll be discussing this in the future again as people get back to normal office, and we'll see whether this mindset to outsource and concentrate on your core business is carried forward into the years ahead. So thank you very much. And
Thank you.
on that
Bye-bye.
note,
Thank you.
Thank you.